The words that would haunt her forever came out as cruel laughter. Damian Foster stepped off the city bus at Riverside Mall, the autumn rain still clinging to his weathered work boots. He had just finished a 14-hour shift at the construction site, his dark skin glistening with a mix of sweat and raindrops, his clothes bearing the honest stains of hard labor. In his calloused hands, he carried a small velvet box that had cost him 3 months of overtime pay. Inside that box was an engagement ring for his girlfriend Maya, a simple but beautiful diamond that represented years of saving, dreaming, and planning for their future together. Today was their 5-year anniversary, and tonight, under the stars at Riverside Park, he was going to ask her to marry him. But first he needed new shoes. Damian looked down at his boots, the same pair he'd worn for 3 years, resoled twice, duct-taped once but still reliable. They had carried him through countless job sites, through rain and mud and concrete dust. They were good boots, honest boots, but they weren't the kind of shoes a man wore when he proposed to the love of his life. The Elegant Step shoe store sat at the corner of the mall's second floor, its pristine glass windows displaying shoes that cost more than some people made in a month. Damian had walked past this store dozens of times over the years, always knowing it wasn't meant for someone like him. But today was different. Today he had $500 in his wallet, money he'd been saving for months, specifically for this moment. As he pushed open the glass door, a soft chime announced his arrival. The store was immaculate, with polished marble floors that reflected the warm light from crystal chandeliers. Leather shoes were displayed like precious artifacts in glass cases, each pair positioned perfectly on silk cushions. Behind the mahogany counter stood Brianna Chen, 26 years old and everything Damian wasn't. Her long black hair was styled in perfect waves, her makeup flawless, her designer suit probably costing more than Damian made in 2 weeks. She had graduated from business school with dreams of managing luxury retail chains, and this job at Elegant Step was supposed to be just a stepping stone to something greater. But today, Brianna was having the worst day of her professional life. Her boss had just informed her that sales were down 30% this quarter, and her position was being reviewed. Her mother's latest medical bills had arrived that morning, another round of heart treatments that insurance only partially covered. The stress was eating her alive, and when she saw Damian walk into her pristine store, every frustration she'd been carrying found a target. Damian approached the counter slowly, his work boots leaving faint marks on the polished floor. "Excuse me, miss," he said politely, his voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who'd been breathing construction dust all day. "I'm looking for dress shoes, something nice for a special occasion." Brianna looked him up and down, taking in the paint-stained jeans, the flannel shirt with a small tear near the elbow, the boots that had clearly seen better days. Her lips curved into a smile that wasn't kind. "Nice shoes, poor guy," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she gestured toward his feet. The words hung in the air like poison. "I think you might be confused about what kind of store this is." Other customers in the store turned to look. An elderly couple by the wall displays paused their conversation. A young businessman trying on loafers glanced over with raised eyebrows. Suddenly all eyes were on Damian, and he felt the familiar burn of humiliation that he'd hoped he'd left behind years ago. "I have money," Damian said quietly, his dignity intact despite the public embarrassment. "I'm looking to spend about $400 on dress shoes." Brianna's laugh was sharp and cutting, echoing off the store's high ceilings. $400? Sir, the shoes in this store start at $800 and go up to $3,000. Maybe you should try the discount store downstairs. I hear they have a nice selection of work boots. The businessman trying on loafers smirked and whispered something to his companion. The elderly couple shook their heads disapprovingly, though whether at Damian's presence or Brianna's rudeness wasn't clear. A young woman near the women's section had pulled out her phone and was discreetly recording the interaction. Damian felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with being judged, dismissed and found wanting before he'd even been given a chance. But this wasn't about him anymore. This was about Maya, about the proposal, about the future they were building together brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. "Miss," he said, his voice steady and calm, I understand these are expensive shoes, but I've been saving for this specific purchase for months. I'd like to see what you have in my size." Brianna's expression hardened into something ugly. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to leave. You're making our other customers uncomfortable." She gestured toward the businessman, who nodded in agreement. "This is a high-end establishment, not a charity." The words hit Damien like physical blows. Making other customers uncomfortable, not a charity. These were the same phrases he'd heard his entire life. The coded language that meant, you don't belong here because of who you are and where you come from. But there was something else in Brianna's voice, something that made Damien study her face more carefully. Beneath the cruelty and condescension, he saw something familiar. Stress, desperation, the look of someone drowning in circumstances beyond their control. "What's your name?" Damien asked softly. "Excuse me?" "Your name." "I'd like to know the name of the person I'm speaking with." Brianna hesitated, thrown off by the unexpected question. Brianna Chen. And you need to leave. Now." Damien nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. "Brianna Chen," he repeated as if testing the words. "And your mother? Does she go by Chen as well, or did she keep her maiden name?" The question was so unexpected, so specific that Brianna took a step back. "What did you say?" "Your mother. I'm wondering about her name because—" Damien paused, reaching into his wallet. He pulled out a business card, simple, unadorned, with just a name and phone number. "Because I think we might have met before." Brianna stared at the card, her face going pale as she read, "Damien Foster, Foster Foundation, supporting medical care for those in need." The store fell silent except for the soft classical music playing overhead. The businessman stopped pretending to examine loafers. The elderly couple moved closer, sensing that something significant was happening. The young woman with the phone adjusted her angle to capture whatever was about to unfold. "That's not possible," Brianna whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's not... You can't be..." Damien put the card back in his wallet, his movements deliberate and calm. 6 months ago, St. Mary's Hospital. A woman named Linda Chen, admitted for emergency heart surgery. The procedure cost $68,000. Insurance covered $30,000. The remaining $38,000 was paid by an anonymous donor. Brianna's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror and recognition. The cruelty drained from her face, replaced by something much worse. The dawning realization of what she had done. The donor requested that his identity remain confidential. Damien continued quietly. He only asked that the hospital tell the family that someone who understood financial hardship wanted to help. The velvet box in Damien's pocket seemed to grow heavier. He had come here to buy shoes for the most important night of his life, and instead found himself face to face with the daughter of a woman whose life he had quietly saved 6 months ago. "Mr. Foster," Brianna stammered, her voice cracking. "I didn't know. I couldn't have known." "No," Damien agreed. "You couldn't have known. But you chose to be cruel to someone you thought couldn't fight back. You chose to humiliate someone you assumed was beneath you." He turned toward the door, leaving behind the stunned silence of the store and the woman who had just discovered that the man she'd mocked for his worn shoes was the same man who had saved her mother's life. As he walked away, Damien could hear Brianna calling after him, her voice desperate and broken. But he didn't turn around. Some lessons could only be learned in the echo chamber of our own conscience, in the quiet moments when we're forced to confront who we really are when we think no one important is watching. The engagement ring in his pocket would have to wait. Maya would understand. She always did. Tonight, instead of a proposal, there would be a different kind of conversation about kindness, assumptions, and the invisible ways our lives intersect with strangers who might be angels in disguise. Behind him, in the pristine shoe store, Brianna Chen stared at the business card she had memorized, understanding for the first time that the worn boots she had mocked belonged to the man who had given her family a miracle. Damien walked through the mall in complete silence, his work boots echoing against the polished floors with each deliberate step. Around him, the familiar sounds of commerce continued. Children laughing at the fountain, teenagers chatting outside the arcade, the distant hum of escalators carrying shoppers between floors. But inside his head, there was only quiet, the kind of profound stillness that comes when the universe reveals one of its most painful ironies. He found a bench near the central fountain and sat down heavily, the velvet ring box pressing against his leg through his pocket. The water danced in choreographed patterns, lit by colored lights that shifted from blue to purple to gold. Families walked by with shopping bags, couples held hands. Elderly people fed breadcrumbs to pigeons that shouldn't have been in the mall, but somehow always found their way inside. Damien closed his eyes and let his mind drift back 6 months, to a cold March evening when everything had changed. He had been leaving St. Mary's Hospital after visiting his friend Carlos, who'd been injured in a workplace accident. The construction industry was dangerous, and Damien made it a point to visit every worker from his crew who ended up hospitalized. It was past visiting hours, but the nurses knew him. The quiet man in work clothes who always brought flowers and sometimes slipped families' grocery store gift cards when he thought no one was looking. As he walked toward the elevator, he heard sobbing coming from the cardiac wing waiting room. Through the open doorway, he saw a young Asian woman, clearly exhausted, still wearing scrubs from her own job, crying into her hands while an older man rubbed her shoulders. "The insurance will only cover half," she was saying through her tears. $30,000. Where am I supposed to get $38,000? She'll die, Dad. Mom will actually die because we're poor. Damien had stopped walking. The words hit him like a punch to the chest, transporting him back 20 years to when his own mother had died of a treatable condition because the family couldn't afford the medication she needed. He was 15 then, standing in a similar hospital corridor, watching his father's shoulders shake with the same helpless grief. Without thinking, Damien had approached the information desk. "Excuse me," he'd said to the night nurse. "The cardiac patient, Linda Chen. What room is she in?" "Are you family?" the nurse had asked. "I'm someone who wants to help." The nurse, a woman named Patricia, who'd seen enough heartbreak in her 30-year career to recognize genuine compassion, had studied Damien's face for a long moment. "Room 417, but visiting hours are over." "I don't need to visit," Damien had said quietly. "I need to talk to whoever handles billing." Now, sitting by the fountain, Damien remembered the conversation that had followed. The billing administrator, called in after hours, the careful paperwork ensuring anonymity, the look of disbelief on Patricia's face when Damien had quietly written a check for $38,000. "Just tell them," he had said, "that someone who understands what it means to lose a parent to poverty wanted to help." The next day, he'd returned to his construction job as if nothing had happened. But for weeks afterward, he'd found excuses to drive past St. Mary's, hoping to catch glimpses of the young woman he'd seen crying in the waiting room. He wanted to know that his mother's memory had helped save someone else's mother. He wanted to know that the cycle of preventable loss had been broken, at least once. 3 weeks later, he'd seen her in the hospital parking lot, laughing with an older woman who moved slowly, but was clearly alive and healing. The young woman, Brianna, though he hadn't known her name then, had been carrying flowers and balloons that read, "Welcome home, Mom." Her face had been radiant with relief and joy. Damien had sat in his truck that day, watching them embrace, and felt something he hadn't experienced since his mother's death. The certainty that love could triumph over circumstance, that kindness could be stronger than poverty, that one person's generosity could ripple outward in ways they might never fully understand. He'd driven away that day without ever introducing himself, content in the knowledge that somewhere in the world, a family was whole because he'd chosen compassion over indifference. And today, 6 months later, that same daughter had looked at his worn work boots and decided he was too poor, too unworthy, too beneath her to deserve basic human dignity. Back in the shoe store, Brianna Chen stood frozen behind the mahogany counter, her perfectly manicured hands shaking as she stared at the spot where Damien had been standing. The other customers had returned to their shopping, but she could feel their occasional glances, the weight of their judgment settling on her shoulders like lead. The businessman who had smirked at Damien's expense approached the counter with a pair of Italian loafers. That was quite a scene, he said, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone who'd never questioned his own privilege. I'm glad you handled that appropriately. People like that really shouldn't be allowed in stores like this. Brianna looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time saw him clearly. His expensive suit, his gold watch, his assumption that she shared his prejudices. 6 months ago, she might have agreed with him. 6 months ago, before her mother's surgery, before the sleepless nights worrying about medical bills, before learning what it meant to be desperate and grateful and terrified all at once. People like what? She asked quietly. The businessman blinked, surprised by the question. You know, working class, poor. They don't belong in establishments like this. My mother cleans office buildings, Brianna said, her voice growing stronger. 12 hours a night, 6 days a week. Is she not allowed in stores like this either? The man's face flushed red. That's not what I meant. Yes, it is, Brianna replied. It's exactly what you meant. And it's exactly what I meant 15 minutes ago when I humiliated a man who turned out to be. She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. The businessman left without buying the loafers. Alone behind the counter, Brianna pulled out her phone and searched for Foster Foundation. The website was simple, elegant, filled with testimonials from families who had been helped through medical crises, educational emergencies, housing situations. There were photos of Damien at hospital dedications, school graduations, community events. In every picture, he wore the same simple clothes, the same gentle expression, the same humble demeanor that she had mistaken for poverty. The foundation's mission statement read, believing that everyone deserves dignity, hope, and the chance to be seen for who they truly are. If this story is touching your heart, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. Brianna scrolled through testimonial after testimonial, a single father whose son's cancer treatment had been funded, an elderly woman whose home had been saved from foreclosure, a young couple whose wedding had been paid for after both families lost their jobs, and there, 3 entries down, was her mother's story. Linda Chen, March 2024. When my daughter thought all hope was lost, an angel appeared. The Foster Foundation paid for my heart surgery when insurance fell short. I'm alive today because someone believes that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account. Mr. Foster, wherever you are, you saved my life and gave my daughter her mother back. There are no words for that kind of generosity. Brianna's mother had written those words while recovering in the hospital, and Brianna had helped her submit them to the foundation's website. They had spent hours wondering about their mysterious benefactor, imagining what kind of person possessed such extraordinary compassion. Now she knew. He was the kind of person who wore work boots because he worked with his hands, who saved for months to buy an engagement ring for someone he loved, who rode the bus because he gave away cars to families who needed them more, who walked into a shoe store with honest money, earned through honest labor, and asked politely to be treated with basic human dignity. And she had looked at those worn boots, boots that had walked construction sites to build homes for other people, boots that had carried him to hospitals to visit injured workers, boots that had walked him through countless acts of quiet generosity, and decided they made him less than human. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Picking up groceries for dinner tonight. Want me to get ingredients for your favorite soup? Love you, sweetheart. Brianna stared at the message, knowing that her mother was alive to send it only because of the man she had just driven away with her cruelty, the man whose worn boots had carried him to St. Mary's Hospital on a cold March night when he could have simply minded his own business and gone home. Instead, he had seen a family in crisis and decided to be the answer to their prayers. And today, when he had needed only the simple courtesy of being allowed to buy dress shoes for what was clearly a special occasion, she had looked at those same boots and decided he didn't deserve to be treated like a human being. Outside the store's glass windows, the mall continued its evening rhythm. But inside, Brianna Chen stood alone with the weight of her cruelty and the magnitude of her mistake, understanding for the first time that sometimes the angels we're waiting for are wearing work boots and flannel shirts, carrying engagement rings and quiet dignity, asking for nothing more than the chance to be seen. 20 minutes after Damien left the store, Brianna Chen did something she had never done in her 5 years of retail management. She closed early. She flipped the sign, locked the door, and ran. Her heels clicked frantically against the mall's marble floors as she searched every corridor, every store, every seating area. The food court, the electronics section, the parking garage. Anywhere a heartbroken man might go to process the weight of such a devastating encounter. But Damien Foster had vanished like morning mist. Brianna stood in the center of the mall's main atrium, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face, her professional composure finally cracking under the weight of what she had done. Shoppers walked around her, some staring at the well-dressed woman having what appeared to be a complete breakdown next to the decorative fountain. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed Mom with a heart emoji. "Hi, sweetheart." Linda Chen's voice was warm and strong, a voice that shouldn't exist, a voice that was only possible because of a man in work boots who had chosen compassion over indifference. "How was work today?" Brianna couldn't speak. The words caught in her throat like broken glass. "Brianna? Are you there?" "Mom," she finally managed, her voice cracking. "Mom, I need to tell you something terrible." "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" "I'm not hurt, but I hurt someone else, someone who—" Brianna took a shaking breath. "Do you remember your anonymous donor? The man who paid for your surgery?" There was a pause. "Of course I remember. Every single day I say a prayer for that man. Why?" "I met him today, and I was horrible to him." The story poured out of Brianna in broken fragments. The worn work boots, her cruel laughter, the humiliation she had inflicted on the very man who had saved her mother's life. Linda Chen listened in growing horror, occasionally gasping, sometimes whispering, "Oh no," as the full magnitude of her daughter's mistake became clear. "His name is Damien Foster," Brianna finished. "And he came to my store looking for dress shoes, probably for something special, and I treated him like garbage because I thought he was poor." Brianna Marie Chen, her mother's voice was sharp with disappointed authority. "How could you? How could you judge anyone based on their appearance? Didn't I raise you better than that?" "You did, Mom. You did raise me better. But I was stressed about money, about your medical bills, about work, and I took it out on an innocent man who was just trying to buy shoes." "The man who saved my life," Linda said quietly. "The man who gave us our miracle." "Yes." There was a long silence. Then Linda's voice, stronger now, filled with the determination that had carried her through heart surgery and recovery. "Where is he now?" "I don't know. He left. I tried to find him, but he's gone. Then we find him. We find Damien Foster, and you apologize properly. And we thank him properly. That man gave me years of life I wouldn't have had. He gave you your mother back. We don't let this end with your mistake." Linda Chen might have been recovering from major heart surgery, but she was still the woman who had worked 3 jobs to put her daughter through college, still the immigrant mother who had never backed down from doing what was right, no matter how difficult. "I'll pick you up in 20 minutes, Linda continued. "We're going to fix this." An hour later, mother and daughter sat in Linda's modest sedan outside the address they had found for the Foster Foundation. The building was smaller than they had expected, a converted warehouse in an industrial section of town, with simple glass doors and a wooden sign that read, "Foster Foundation, Building Hope, One Family at a Time." Through the windows, they could see Damien sitting at a plain desk still wearing his work clothes, talking quietly on the phone. Even from a distance they could see the gentleness in his posture, the patience in his gestures as he listened to whatever crisis was being described on the other end of the line. "He's beautiful," Linda whispered, tears in her eyes. "Look at him, Brianna. Really look at him." And Brianna did look. She saw past the faded flannel shirt to the broad shoulders that carried other people's burdens, past the worn jeans to the strong hands that had built homes and signed checks and wiped away strangers' tears, past the work boots to the feet that had walked into hospitals and community centers and anywhere else that hope was needed. She saw what she should have seen in the store, a man of substance, character, and profound generosity, wearing the honest clothes of honest work. They watched as Damien finished his call and pulled out the velvet ring box, opening it to look at the engagement ring inside. Even from across the street, they could see the way his face softened, the gentle smile that transformed his features as he thought about whoever was waiting for that ring. He was buying dress shoes for a proposal. Brianna realized, her voice breaking. That's why he needed nice shoes. He was going to propose to someone he loves, and I ruined it. Linda reached over and took her daughter's hand. Then we help him fix it. Come on. The bell above the foundation's door chimed softly as they entered. Damien looked up from his desk, and Brianna watched his expression shift from surprise to wariness, to something that might have been resigned sadness. Mr. Foster, Linda said, stepping forward before her daughter could speak. My name is Linda Chen. You saved my life 6 months ago. Damien stood slowly, his eyes moving between mother and daughter, understanding dawning in his face. Mrs. Chen, how are you feeling? I'm alive because of you, Linda said simply. My heart is strong because of you. My daughter has her mother because of you. And today that same daughter treated you with cruelty and disrespect, not knowing that she was looking at the angel who had already blessed our family. Brianna stepped forward, her professional confidence completely gone, replaced by the raw vulnerability of someone facing the worst mistake of their life. Mr. Foster, there are no words for what I did today. No excuse, no justification. I saw your clothes and your boots and I made assumptions about your worth as a human being. I was wrong. I was cruel. And I am so sorry. Damien studied her face for a long moment. You were having a bad day, he said quietly. We all have bad days. No, Brianna shook her head firmly. A bad day doesn't excuse treating someone with such disrespect. You came to my store as a customer, with money, with a legitimate need, and I judged you based on your appearance. That's not having a bad day. That's having a bad character. And I want to be better than that. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, her own this time. I'm quitting my job at the shoe store. I don't deserve to work in customer service if I can't treat all customers with basic human dignity. But before I leave, I want to do something. Damien raised an eyebrow. What's that? I want to buy you the best pair of dress shoes in the store. For your proposal. Brianna's voice was steady now, filled with determination. And I want to do it right this time. With respect, with gratitude, and with the understanding that it's an honor to serve someone as generous as you. That's not necessary. Yes, it is, Linda interrupted gently. It's necessary for her, Mr. Foster. My daughter needs to make this right. Not for you, but for herself. For the woman I raised her to be. Damien looked at the ring box on his desk, then back at the two women standing before him. One who owed him her life, one who owed him an apology that could never be adequate. Both offering him something he hadn't expected, a chance for this story to end differently than it had begun. All right, he said finally, but on one condition. Anything, Brianna said. You don't quit your job. You stay, and you remember this feeling the next time someone walks into your store wearing clothes that don't meet your expectations. You remember that you don't know their story, their struggles, or the size of their heart. Can you do that? Brianna nodded, tears flowing freely now. I can do that. I will do that. Good. Damien smiled for the first time since entering the store that afternoon. Because I have a feeling that the man in work boots who walks into your store next month might be someone's hero too, and he deserves to be treated like one. As they prepared to leave for the shoe store, Damien carefully placed the ring box back in his pocket. Tonight, under the stars at Riverside Park, he would still propose to Maya. But now he would be wearing shoes chosen not just by his own judgment, but blessed by the gratitude of a family he had helped save, fitted by hands that had learned the difference between serving customers and serving humanity. Sometimes the most beautiful shoes are the ones that carry us toward redemption. The drive back to Elegant Step was silent, except for the soft hum of Linda's sedan and the quiet rhythm of Brianna's breathing as she prepared for what might be the most important sale of her career. When they arrived at the mall, Brianna used her manager's key to reopen the store after hours. The crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the marble floors, and the leather shoes sat in their glass cases like sleeping treasures waiting to be awakened. But this time, when Damien Foster walked through those glass doors, everything was different. "Welcome to Elegant Step, Mr. Foster," Brianna said, her voice steady and professional, but warmed by genuine respect. "I'm honored to help you find the perfect shoes for your special occasion." Linda had insisted on waiting outside, saying that this moment belonged to her daughter and the man who had given their family a miracle. Through the store windows, she watched as Brianna guided Damien to a chair usually reserved for their most valued customers. "What kind of event are we shopping for?" Brianna asked as she knelt to measure his feet, a service she had denied him hours earlier. "I'm proposing to my girlfriend tonight," Damien said quietly. "We've been together for 5 years. I want everything to be perfect." Brianna's hands stilled for a moment as she absorbed the magnitude of what those shoes represented. Not just leather and laces, but the foundation for one of the most important moments in two people's lives. "Tell me about her," Brianna said as she noted his measurements. Damien's face lit up with the kind of joy that only comes from talking about someone you love completely. "Her name is Maya. She's a third-grade teacher. She has this laugh that sounds like music, and she believes in people even when they've stopped believing in themselves. She's been with me through everything. The lean years when I was building my business, the early days of the foundation when I wasn't sure if I could really make a difference." "She sounds wonderful," Brianna said, and meant it. "She is. She's the kind of person who sees a homeless man on the street corner and stops to ask his name. She's the reason I started the foundation, actually. She told me once that we don't get to keep blessings by hoarding them. We get to keep them by giving them away." Brianna disappeared into the back storage room and returned with 3 boxes of shoes, each one representing the finest craftsmanship the store had to offer. But instead of the most expensive options, she had chosen based on what would suit Damien's character. Elegant without being ostentatious, refined without being pretentious. "These are Italian leather," she explained, opening the first box. "Handcrafted by artisans who've been making shoes for 4 generations. They're comfortable enough for a long evening, formal enough for the most important question you'll ever ask." Damien tried on the first pair. Rich brown leather that complemented his skin tone beautifully. They fit perfectly, and when he stood to test them, Brianna could see immediately that they were exactly right. "How do they feel?" she asked. "Like they were made for tonight," Damien admitted, walking a few steps across the store. The shoes transformed his entire presence, elevating his natural dignity into something that belonged in any ballroom, any restaurant, any moment that mattered. "Mr. Foster," Brianna said as she knelt to check the fit, "can I tell you something?" "Of course. My mother talks about you every day. Every single day since her surgery, she mentions the angel who saved her life. She prays for you during grace at dinner. She tells anyone who will listen about the kindness of strangers and how one person's generosity can change everything." Damien was quiet for a moment, looking down at the shoes that would carry him toward his future. "Your mother earned her miracle, Miss Chen. She raised a daughter who cares enough about making things right to reopen her store after hours. She raised a daughter who almost threw away the chance to serve someone extraordinary because she was too proud and too scared to see past the surface," Brianna corrected. "But maybe that's part of why this happened. Maybe I needed to learn this lesson before I helped other people in your position." She stood up and walked to the register, but instead of ringing up the sale, she pulled out the business card that had changed everything that afternoon. "Mr. Foster, I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about staying at my job and remembering this feeling. I want to do more than just remember it. I want to create a program." Damien raised an eyebrow. "What kind of program?" "A partnership between Elegant Step and the Foster Foundation, for people who need dress shoes for job interviews, graduations, weddings, court appearances, important moments when having the right shoes can make all the difference. We provide the shoes, your foundation covers the cost for families who can't afford them." Damien stared at her for a long moment, then slowly smiled. "You want to make sure no one else gets turned away because of assumptions about what they can afford?" I want to make sure that everyone who walks through these doors feels like they belong here, regardless of what they're wearing when they arrive. Everyone deserves to feel dignified when they're shopping for the shoes that will carry them through their most important moments. That, Damien said quietly, is exactly the kind of thinking that changes the world. As Brianna rang up the sale, at cost refusing to accept any profit from the transaction, she felt something shift inside her. The stress about her mother's medical bills was still there, but it was tempered now by a sense of purpose she had never experienced in 5 years of retail work. "Mr. Foster?" she said, as she handed him the elegant box containing his new shoes. "Thank you." "For what?" "For showing me who I want to be." An hour later, as the sun began to set over Riverside Park, Damien Foster walked along the familiar path toward the spot where he and Maya had shared their first kiss 5 years earlier. His new shoes carried him confidently across the grass, each step bringing him closer to the woman who had taught him that love multiplies when it's shared. Maya was waiting by the old oak tree, wearing the blue dress he loved, her dark hair catching the golden light of the setting sun. She turned when she heard his footsteps, and her face lit up with the smile that had been his home for 5 years. "You look handsome," she said, noticing his new shoes immediately. "Very distinguished." "I had help," Damien replied, thinking of Brianna and Linda and the afternoon that had taught him that sometimes our greatest challenges become our most meaningful opportunities to grow. As he dropped to one knee and pulled out the velvet box, Damien thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. The construction sites that had taught him the value of honest work, the loss of his mother that had taught him the urgency of compassion, the foundation that had taught him the power of quiet generosity, and today a shoe store that had taught him that grace can transform even our most painful encounters into something beautiful. "Maya Rodriguez," he said, his voice steady and sure, "you've taught me that love isn't something we find when it's something we build day by day, choice by choice, act of kindness by act of kindness. Will you marry me?" When she said yes, laughing and crying and pulling him up to kiss her, his new shoes kept him steady on ground that felt like it was shifting beneath him with joy. If this story moved you, don't stop here. Click the next one, subscribe, and share this with someone who still believes in kindness. 6 months later, Brianna Chen stood behind the counter at Elegant Step, fitting a young man in work clothes for his first job interview shoes. His name was Miguel, and he was nervous about affording the shoes he needed for a construction management position that could change his family's life. "Don't worry about the cost," Brianna said gently, thinking of the Foster Foundation partnership that had already helped 47 people find their perfect shoes for their perfect moments. "We have a program for situations exactly like yours." As she knelt to measure Miguel's feet, Brianna caught a glimpse of herself in the store's mirrors. She was still the same person, still wearing the same professional attire, still working behind the same mahogany counter. But everything had changed. She had learned to see past surfaces to souls, past clothes to character, past assumptions to the infinite possibility that every person who walked through her door might be carrying dreams worth supporting, stories worth honoring, hearts worth treating with dignity. And somewhere across town in a modest apartment above the Foster Foundation offices, Damien and Maya Foster were planning their next act of quiet generosity, wearing comfortable shoes and living the truth that the most beautiful thing we can wear is compassion for one another. The shoes we choose matter, but the steps we take in them matter more.